Every headline you've seen about Vasuki indicus says the same thing, that scientists just found a snake bigger than Titanoboa, the undisputed king of prehistoric serpents. And here's the problem with that. It's not really true. At least not in the way you're being told. This video is about the actual history of the biggest snake ever title. Who held it, who took it, how many times the science got revised, and why the Vasuki story is way more complicated and honestly way more interesting than any of the headlines let on. I've gone through the original study, the vertebral measurements, and the fossil record going back over a century, and what I found is that this whole conversation has a massive detail almost nobody's talking about. I'll get to it, but first you need to understand how we even got here, because the story starts with a mistake that happened twice. When the first vertebrae of Titanoboa came out of the Cerrejón coal mine in Colombia, researchers set them aside. They thought they were looking at crocodile bones. Nobody expected a snake that size to exist, so nobody was looking for one. It took a second look, years later, for someone to realize those weren't croc vertebrae at all. They were the backbone of the largest snake anyone had ever seen. Scientists eventually estimated the average adult Titanoboa at roughly 13 meters long and about 135 kilograms in weight. To put that in terms you can actually picture, Titanoboa was about 45 feet on average, which is a third larger than the green anaconda, the largest snake alive today. Its body was so wide that a full-grown human could not wrap their arms around it. It was the world's largest land vertebrate for roughly 10 million years. And here's where the story gets weird, because the exact same mistake, the crocodile mix-up, happened again with the very snake that's now being called Titanoboa's replacement, and almost nobody is mentioning that. The holotype specimen of Vasuki indicus was discovered in 2005 within the sedimentary layers of the Naredi Formation in the Panadro lignite mine in the Kutch district of Gujarat, Western India. The bones were dug up, shelved, and classified as crocodilian remains, just like Titanoboa's bones were. They sat like that for 19 years. It wasn't until 2024 that researchers at IIT Roorkee formally re-examined them, found they were unmistakably snake-like, and published the description. Two biggest snake ever discoveries, two accidental crocodile mix-ups, decades apart. The fact that this keeps happening tells you something important about how science actually works, and it matters a lot for what comes next. So before we get into Vasuki's numbers, there's something I want to plant in your head right now, because I'm going to come back to it. The headline says Vasuki is bigger than Titanoboa, but the study's own co-author hedged on that. I'll tell you exactly what he said and why it changes everything. But we need to build up to it properly, because to understand why that hedge matters, you first need to know about the snake that everyone forgot. Before Titanoboa existed in the public record, before the Cerrejón mine, before any of this, there was a different champion. Before the Paleocene constrictor genus Titanoboa was described from Colombia in 2009, Gigantophis garstini was regarded as the largest snake ever recorded. Its discovery was published in 1901 by paleontologist Charles William Andrews. It lived about 40 million years ago during the Eocene epoch, in the region of the northern Sahara, where Egypt and Algeria are now located. That's over 100 years of being the reigning champion of snake size, and almost nobody remembers its name, probably because Gigantophis garstini doesn't have the same ring as Titanoboa. Now here's where Gigantophis becomes directly relevant to the Vasuki debate. Jason, head of the Smithsonian Institution, compared fossil Gigantophis vertebrae to those of the largest modern snakes and concluded that the extinct snake could grow from 9.3 to 10.7 meters in length. That was the number that stood for years. Then a more detailed study came out, and using a model of morphological variation in extant snakes, researchers revised the estimate to just 6.9 plusers 0.3 meters long. That's nearly a 4-meter slash. The snake that held the biggest ever title for over a century had its size estimate cut by almost a third when scientists took a closer look at the bones. So if it happened to Gigantophis, if a 100-year-old estimate got completely revised, why would anyone assume Vasuki's numbers are final? That question is the whole thread of this video. Keep it in mind. Now let's talk about Vasuki properly, because this is where most coverage completely falls apart. Vasuki indicus lived during the Middle Eocene epoch, roughly 47 million years ago. The researchers described 27 mostly well-preserved vertebrae, some of which are articulated, which appear to be from a fully grown animal. Fossilized vertebrae unearthed from the lignite mine in Gujarat reveal a thick-bodied, powerful snake, likely built for slow, stealthy ambush attacks, similar to modern anacondas. The species is named after Vasuki, the serpent king coiled around the neck of Lord Shiva in Hindu mythology. So the name alone tells you this thing was not small, and the size estimates are genuinely staggering. On the surface, Vasuki has an estimated body length between 10.9 and 15.2 meters, making it the largest known madsoid. The high end of that range, 15.2 meters, about 50 feet, is what all the headlines ran with. That's the number that made every science page say bigger than Titanoboa. But here's what almost nobody explained. That range isn't one estimate. It's two completely different estimates built on two different measurements of the same bones. One equation, based on post-zygapophyseal width, resulted in a body length range of 10.9 to 12.2 meters. The other equation, based on pre-zygapophyseal width, resulted in a body length range of 14.5 to 15.2 meters. That's a 4-meter swing depending on which bone measurement you trust. The Vasuki beats Titanoboa headline is built entirely on the high end of that second equation. The low end, 10.9 to 12.2 meters, puts Vasuki well under Titanoboa's average of around 13 meters. So when you see the biggest snake ever found, what you're actually seeing is the most optimistic reading of one out of two available regression equations applied to 27 vertebrae from a partial skeleton. That's not a knock on the science. It's just what the science actually says. And it's a lot more honest than what most coverage is telling you. And this is where we get to the detail I promised you at the start. The thing the study's own co-author said that almost nobody quoted, Sunil Bajpai, one of the two researchers who authored the Vasuki paper, acknowledged that the vertebral dimensions of Vasuki are slightly smaller than those of Titanoboa, which is estimated at 12.8 meters. He said the team cannot say whether Vasuki was more massive or more slender compared to Titanoboa. That's huge, because length and size are not the same thing. A longer snake that's narrower and lighter is not necessarily a bigger animal than a shorter snake that's wider and heavier. And when the co-author of the record-breaking study is hedging on whether their snake was even larger in overall mass, that's the story. That's the detail buried in paragraph 12 that most videos never get to. The raw bone evidence actually still favors Titanoboa. Among all known snakes, Vasuki's vertebral dimensions are slightly smaller than those of Titanoboa. Vasuki only wins on one specific length estimate method. On raw bone size, the most direct physical evidence we have, Titanoboa's vertebrae are still the largest ever found from any snake. So the title depends entirely on which measurement you use and which equation you trust. That's not a settled debate. That's an open one. There's one more layer to this that the researchers themselves flagged, and it's the most honest thing in the whole paper. The length estimates for Vasuki were built by comparing its vertebrae to modern snake relatives. But the scientists acknowledge those modern relatives might not even be good stand-ins for an extinct species from 47 million years ago. The body proportions could be completely different. The relationship between vertebra size and total body length in a madsoid snake from the Eocene might not match a modern python or boa at all, which means the entire extrapolation, the number that generated every headline, rests on a comparison that the scientists themselves said might not be accurate. Now here's the part that actually makes all of this more interesting, not less. Because Vasuki and Gigantophus, the forgotten champion, aren't random, unrelated animals. In phylogenetic analyses, Vasuki is recovered as a member of the extinct snake clade Madsoidae, as the sister taxon to the clade formed by Madsoia pistorensis and Gigantophus garstini. Vasuki is basically a close cousin of Gigantophus. They're part of the same ancient family, the Madsoids, a lineage of Gondwanan supersnakes that spread across southern continents for millions of years. After India collided with Asia around 50 million years ago, the newly created land routes made it possible for these snakes to cross over into North Africa through southern Eurasia. That's likely how Gigantophus ended up in Egypt. The new biggest snake isn't some random outlier from out of nowhere. It's the largest member of a whole dynasty of giant snakes that scientists are only now starting to piece together properly. And here's a detail that makes the Titanoboa versus Vasuki comparison even less apples to apples than you'd think. Titanoboa likely spent its time in the water, ambushing its prey. Titanoboa fossils were found in Cerrejón, Colombia, in an area that was once a tropical swamp similar to the Mississippi River Delta or the Everglades. Vasuki, on the other hand, was almost certainly not an aquatic animal. Its vertebral morphology suggests a terrestrial or semi-aquatic lifestyle, closer to how large pythons live today, moving through swamp margins and backwater environments on land. So you're not really comparing two versions of the same animal. You're comparing a river monster to something closer to a land-walking swamp giant. They live 13 million years apart, on different continents, in completely different ecological roles. The who's bigger framing almost misses the point. If you're finding this as fascinating as I do, the way these discoveries keep rewriting each other, the way a bone in a drawer for 19 years can flip the record books. Drop a comment below and tell me which of these three you'd least want to encounter. Titanoboa in a river, Vasuki walking through a swamp, or Gigantophus in the Egyptian desert 40 million years ago. Genuinely curious what people say. And if prehistoric megafauna is your thing, the video on this channel about the most terrifying ocean predators from before the dinosaurs goes just as deep into the stuff most videos skip over. It's worth your time. So here's where we actually land. Titanoboa held the biggest snake ever title for 15 years after Gigantophus lost it. And Gigantophus held it for over a century before that, only to have its estimate slashed nearly in half when better analysis came along. Now Vasuki is being handed the crown based on the high end of one out of two regression equations, applied to 27 partial vertebrae, compared to modern snakes that might not even be the right reference animals. And the study's own co-author won't confirm it was heavier or more massive than Titanoboa. The record for largest snake vertebrae ever found still belongs to Titanoboa. The record for longest estimated body length, by one specific measurement method, might now belong to Vasuki, depending on which equation you trust and whether those modern comparisons hold up. And somewhere in the Egyptian desert, Gigantophus garstini is sitting at 6.9 meters, completely forgotten, having once been the uncontested king for over 100 years. The biggest snake ever title isn't settled. It never really was. And the fact that two of the top contenders spent years in a drawer, misidentified as crocodile bones, should tell you everything about how much we still don't know about what was actually out there.